My name is Sam Gemar. I'm a former NASA space shuttle astronaut and flew 3 space shuttles on Atlantis, Discovery, and Columbia. Well, I'm one of those kind of rare breeds that I always knew that this is what I wanted to do. Now, having said that, it's a long journey from wanting to do it and ultimately having the opportunity to fly in space. But I always, as a kid, I always wanted to fly in space. As an astronaut, I was inspired by the Mercury astronauts when I was growing up, Gemini, Apollo, and but it was in college where I really had the opportunity to start working aggressively towards that goal. Well, I don't know that there is any preparing oneself to be chosen. I think, again, you put in your application, and it's important, I guess, when people put in applications for jobs that, the whole point is to kind of give people an idea who you are, what you've done, what you're capable of doing, and to communicate the idea that you want to come work for them, right? And so you kind of lay that out on paper. You go through the interview process. I enjoyed that. The interview process was a full week long. You come in on a Sunday night. They start with testing, battery of psychology or psychologists have a shot at you. The psychiatrist has a shot at you. All the medical doctors have a shot at you. And that whole thing lasts through the week, and it ends with an interview, which is really 2-hour interview, and that's kind of where those final decisions are made. Yeah, I think there's 2 things. One is you have this overwhelming feeling of insignificance, right? When you think about your place off the planet and you look back at the globe and you see yourself in a whole different light, the Earth looks almost like a new destination. It's not really home anymore. It's some distant land, and your civilization is now the spacecraft and your 4 colleagues that are flying with you, and that little close-knit community is now your whole world, and the actual world looks like someplace else, like someplace that you'd like to visit. That's one thing. It's a very humbling experience. The other impression I had was on my first day of spaceflight that made an impression is we were passing over the Brazilian rainforest about the time we were getting ready for sleep period. And I looked down and you see all this lightning dashing around the clouds, just kind of going cloud to cloud to cloud. And I thought to myself, if you had never been here, you could come to the incorrect conclusion that the planet was uninhabitable just because of all the electricity in the atmosphere. Sure, the physical challenge is if you're going to do a spacewalk. If you're fortunate enough to do a spacewalk, then that requires significant physical strength. Not because you need to move things around, they're weightless, it doesn't matter. They have mass, you have to get them started and stopped. But in terms of weightlessness, it's not difficult to move objects around, it's not difficult to move you around. But it is difficult to do detailed tasks on orbit when you're in that in the extravehicular mobility suit, right? Because you think of it as you're in a balloon, and there's 4.3 pounds per square inch of pressure trying to inflate you. And so if you pull your arms in, well, that air pressure is trying to push your arms out. If you make a fist with a gloved hand, well, that air pressure is trying to extend those fingers back out. So you're constantly working against that air pressure inside the suit. So that makes it difficult. The other thing is the suit is very restrictive from a mobility perspective, so that makes it difficult. You prepare yourself through training for those tasks, and of course most of us have a pretty rigorous physical training program while we're there. We'll exercise 5-6 days a week, either strength training or physio training. Yeah, so every day is different, as you can imagine, because the requirements are different of the mission. Every mission is different, but generally, astronauts are scheduled for 16 hours a day working and 8 hours of rest. And so the first 3 hours after you wake up is dedicated to personal hygiene, housekeeping, meal preparation, and then the last 3 hours before sleep, is again the same: meal preparation, personal hygiene, getting ready for sleep, all of those kinds of things. The rest of the time, that 10 hours in the middle, your timeline down to the second in many cases, right? Full of activity. So the Mission Control Center is going to make sure that you're gainfully employed that whole time. That pre and post sleep period, we talk about it being kind of a protected period, but we still have to do star tracker alignments. We still have to do state vector updates to the spacecraft position. I mean, there's a bunch. We still have to redo our flight plan for the day. So all of those things are going to take place in that first 3 hours. So there's a lot going on, right? Sure, I think that, I mean, there's many. We did, a number of deployment activities during all of the missions. We did a number of what we call secondary experiments. They're mostly medical processing experiments or dynamic evaluations for the International Space Station Trust. We did a number of assembly tasks, proof of concept assembly tasks for the International Space Station. All of that was tremendously rewarding. From a science perspective, probably the Upper Atmosphere Research Satellite was probably the most significant contribution, because it gave us a complete data set of both the northern and southern hemisphere, of the chemistry of the upper atmosphere, kind of the winds aloft of the upper atmosphere, and the energy components, the solar radiation components, both direct radiation from the sun and reflected energy back. But in addition to that, like I said, a host of secondary experiments are going to keep you well busy or keep you occupied, and we're producing, significant science throughout all of those missions. Well, I think in the next, decade or two, you're going to see probably a permanent presence on the moon, and in 2035, probably that's a little optimistic, probably 2040 to 2050, Mars exploration. To me, the exploration mission, which NASA is kind of going back to, is the more exciting mission. Further exploration of the moon and onto Mars, right? I mean, you guys are aged perfect to be the first people to walk on Mars, right?
Yeah, hopefully we're able to do that.
I would tell them to dream big, right? And then be willing to devote the time and the effort to achieving those goals. It's the price of admission is not free, right? There is a heavy price to pay for these things, but it's well worth that price.